following these college prospects throughout the year, right? And I think that's kind of sets things apart a little bit.
Absolutely. Playing college fantasy football and having two Devy leagues really helps me. And it's one of the reasons Dan Klaskins and James Adams asked me on in about mid-January to go through rookies. And I have rankings. Now, they obviously change from mid-January to now. But I know the players, and I love this part right now. People are waking up to Tajay Spears. I hear people now posting about Deuce Vaughn, who I've been watching for 3 years. So I feel like, wow, welcome to the team. I'm so glad you like the film. I've been watching these guys play for a real long time, and I might disagree with someone's analysis, but that's fine. But I mean, it does help me get ahead of the competition early. And then, of course, you're always finding out more information in your research, or I watch more tape, because January is basically, and February is a tape month for me. So I get to go back and a little more nuanced, right? I'm looking at footwork more than I do in a live game. I'm not necessarily studying, the quickness of a running back's feet through the hole. But when I can slow down the tape, I can watch, I go, oh, okay, I like these feet on this player. But yeah, I do think it helps to be in Devy college fantasy football, because there's no one I don't know. Right. I mean, maybe there's a guy at the FCS level. I mean, that I'm not, something could pop up, but I know anyone at the FCS level.
John, I think that's that's exactly what I mean. I mean, I'll be the first person I mentioned, or that gets mentioned, that you don't know something about or haven't watched play, will be the first one in my memory. And we've been doing this a number of years, right? So, and that's, to me, again, everyone out there, if you're listening, I know there's a lot of content consume pre-draft. This is one of the reasons why I listen to people like John Laub, though, because he has been watching the college football. He can come on at any point during the season and tell you what these tiny schools are doing that I don't even know exist, and key players on all those teams. So I want to start out, John. We talked a little bit in a previous video about your quarterback class. And, I'll just want to run through it really quick. And, I may get you to comment on a couple of these guys. Just to give your top five, it's C.J. Stroud from Ohio State, Bryce Young from Alabama, Anthony Richardson, you have at 3, which is a little higher than a lot of people. Hendon Hooker, drawing a lot out of Tennessee, drawing a lot of conversation as well. And Will Levis, who I think is someone that I'm interested in, because maybe he has some traits that fit in. Well, let me just start with him. What do you think of him in a Shane Steichen offense with the Colts?
So a little concerned about him as a prospect. I haven't broken down the new Colts. Yes, we saw him with Philadelphia, and he did. Hey, how can we complain about the development of Jalen Hurts and that wide receiver core? But, when you have A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, you definitely look like a better offensive coordinator. There's no question in my regard to that. How much was it him? How much was it the head coach? How much was it Jalen Hurts? So we're going to find out about this man as an offense coordinator, now head coach, pretty soon if they take Will Levis. I think it's not an awful spot to land in. Here's why. They can run the football. If you want to protect your young quarterback, if give the ball to Jonathan Taylor. I mean, we all were a little frustrated. I know he got injured last year, but Jonathan Taylor didn't hit the ceiling that we had expected as fantasy fans. But if you have a young quarterback in Will Levis, give the ball 230 times to Jonathan Taylor and protect him. But Bob, when you watch the games of Will Levis, and I watched a lot of Kentucky football because, A, I watched him with Wendell Robinson. 2, he's from the state of Connecticut. I knew about him as a high school player. He was a Connecticut State Player of the Year. I was mad he didn't go to UConn. That's a different story for a different day. He goes to Penn State. He doesn't even beat out Sean Clifford, who's not really an NFL prospect. He ends up at Kentucky, and I give him all the credit in the world. To move up from Penn State to Kentucky in the SEC, that's a jump up in competition. And he did play well. However, watch the 2 years of film. Wendell Robinson was a big reason why Will Levis was successful. And the film is much better in 2021 than 2022. Now, the offensive line also fell backwards. I'm not going to sit here and tell you the offensive line in Kentucky was not bad. It was pretty awful. Remember when we talked about Cam Akers at Florida State and they had one of those abysmal offensive lines? It's kind of what Will Levis was in at Kentucky. I mean, I don't know exactly the grading system on the PFF who had better or worse of those two lines, but neither one was good. But when I watch Will Levis, Bob, and I don't know the play call necessarily, that's one of the disadvantages. I don't know what the coordinator called on every play. But he gets frustrated in a live game and he makes mistakes. How many of those mistakes are his own mental or frustration? Or how many of those mistakes are lack of teammates making plays? And we have to understand at college, there's a huge discrepancy in talent. I mean, when you got Alabama's defense against Kentucky's offensive line, I mean, it's just the schism between the talent level is so great. But when I know you'll know this reference, Joe Montana and now Joe Burrow, they're very cool under fire.
Right.
And that's not the only way to be successful quarterback. So I'm not using it as the only benchmark. But when I watch Will Levis, Bob, he's the opposite. He gets frustrated. He gets mad. I think he lets the inability of his teammates to make plays hurt his ability to perform on the field. That's my gut instinct watching the games after 40 years of football. Again, I don't know the play call, so there is a little, obviously I'm having wiggle room in the analysis. But then I go to my model, Bob, and there's one really upsetting statistic that bothers me with Will Levis. Only 46 career touchdowns, but what bothers me most is 25 interceptions. That tells me football IQ and talent around him. There's some mistakes happening. How much is it his mistake? How much is it the players around him? That's debatable, but great prospects overcome those. The other thing, his passing efficiency. We are in a golden era of college football throwing it, Bob. The passing efficiency numbers, I mean, you and I grew up in the 80s where if it was the equivalent of 120, you were like, oh my God. Now I'm looking for a 155 benchmark. He falls below at 145.6. So those are two really big football IQ concerns. Being smart with the ball, physical stature, no question. Arm strength, no question. Ability to run the football, absolutely. But his realm of outcomes are vast, Bob. So I consider floor just as much as ceiling when I do ranking, and that's why I'm down on Levis, because I think he's more likely to be a bust than he is to be a star.
Mr. Scamper's asking the Panthers please not draft Will Levis. I see the questions coming in. We'll get to them in a minute. I want to touch quickly, John, on Anthony Richardson. Seems to be a little bit of a polarizing figure. You have him 3. I see other people expressing great concerns. Where are you at? The concerns. Where are you at with regard to those?
The upside is huge. The ceiling is there. And I've said this on other shows. I believe he is Cam Newton and Tim Tebow. That's my best comparison. His ceiling is Cam Newton. He has the arm strength and the physicality of Cam Newton. I think people forget how good Cam Newton was his first 4 or 5 years in the NFL. Just such a physical quarterback. Unfortunately, that shoulder injury just derailed his career. It's hard to be a physical quarterback. You're going to take punishment over a period of time. So that's Anthony Richardson's ceiling. But Bob, I've watched a lot of Anthony Richardson. There's some Tim Tebow throws on tape there. Look at that completion percentage, 54.7, Bob. I mean, look, I'm not saying Florida, they don't have great receivers, but that is exceptionally low. I was watching an ESPN show, and they had the 5 players he was ranked with in the last 25 years prospects in the first round at that completion percentage, Bob. They're not good. So there is a massive floor here. And I will say, that's why I have a second round grade. Most people have a first round grade, but you're going on upside if you have a first round grade. I'm a big believer in this. Look at the games played, Bob. 19. This concerned me about This concerned me about Trey Lance very much. Now the injury was a factor, so we have to consider that. But Trey Lance has had a learning curve. I think Anthony Richardson needs more than any quarterback of the last 5 years. He needs a year on the sideline. He needs to learn the game, Bob. And that's why I have him a little bit lower. I don't know who his quarterback coach is going to be. I don't know who the offensive coordinator is going to be. I don't think the quarterback position is always coached up so well. So there's factors. I have him at number 3. But the ceiling is Cam Newton, and that's why I have him there.
Fair enough. Again, if you're just tuning in, this is John Laub, the Gridiron Scholar. Follow him on Twitter at GridironSkull91. I'm Bob Harris. I'm on Twitter too, at Football Diehard. You can listen to me. Greetings to everyone who's been popping into the chat. We're going to run through the running backs here today. The wide receivers, first round of wide receivers, also up and available at Football Diehards. It's the 10th anniversary, 10th year of John Laub doing these fantastic draft capsules and articles for us, and established himself as one of the leaders in the industry, certainly the fantasy industry among the draftniks. In my mind, there's no one that focuses on the fantasy aspect that is steeped in the college play of these players. A couple points. John Bonneville noted that a lot of Will Levis's interceptions are inaccurate throws. He thinks less so than bad decisions. So interesting point of view there. What do you think about that thought, John?
So there are people who have been mentioning that, and there is a factor, but how can we expect him to be more accurate at the NFL level? And that, to me, we usually don't see. Now, Jalen Hurts has been an outlier, right? He's just been phenomenal. So is Josh Allen from his foot. So it can happen, but historically, it doesn't usually happen. Hey, there is truth to that narrative with Will Levis. Absolutely. He's off target, which leads to interceptions. But that's part of your performance profile.
All right. Fair enough. So let's start looking at some of the running backs. And I think, as we dive in here, I see some of the questions that have come in. I'll throw those out at the appropriate time. I want to hit some of these highlights here, though. And I guess the highlight is Bijan Robinson. The University of Texas seems, I've heard the words generational talent used in connection with him. Are we getting a little hyperbolic there, John, or is that kind of in the range?
I think as I'm becoming a curmudgeon, Bob, in my old age, in 10 years now, I'm not sure if I'm using generational anymore. Right. Now, 7 years ago, I think I would have used that. But what I will say this, in fairness to Bijan, in my model, in the 10 years, the top 5 prospects, not necessarily in this order, Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, Jonathan Taylor, and Breece Hall. Bijan Robinson deserves to be in that quintet of prospects. He has upside of a so-called generational talent. Do I love the tape, Bob? I've been watching this young man for 3 years. Unbelievable. And while I think he has some of the best jump cuts and vision in traffic, one way that I like to grade running backs, Bob, is inside out. I'm a big believer if you can't run between the tackles very successfully, it's hard to get on the field for a long period of time. I'd rather have my back be great between the tackles. The outside will take care of itself, what the coordinator, the run scheme, when the plays are called. So Bijan between the tackles, Bob, his jump cuts and his vision and his ability to make people miss is spectacular, and his contact balance. He takes some big hits, but he's a big man, so he can bounce off some people. He's not Derrick Henry strong. I mean, Derrick Henry's just such a running back with power and strength, but he's in the bucket and in the discussion. But his jump cuts are more like Saquon Barkley was at Penn State, where you just are like, oh my God, how did a man, let's see, what does he weigh exactly? What do I have for Bijan right now? 5'10", 215. A 215-pound man to make that jump cut, lateral move, you're like, oh my God, he can get outside. Yes, I think if you put him in an outside zone scheme, I think he could be successful at it. No question about it in my book. But what makes him special, Bob? He's an unbelievable pass catcher. You could line him up in the slot and run him 20 yards down the field, and he can have an option route depending on who's covering him, the linebacker or the safety. And I believe Bijan can get open. His hands are so good for a big back. And that, I mean, in PPR scoring formats, you're talking about a back who has 60 catch upside, 1,200 yards rushing. And obviously he's a touchdown scorer. He's so big near the goal line. So I like, to me, he's no doubt number one, even in Superflex, dynasty prospect in fantasy football this year.
A few comments on there. John Bonneville notes his teammate at Texas, Johnson, reminded him of Saquon and Miles Sanders at Penn State. Also, Brian Larkin brings up the question I want to get to, which is where are we drafting him, John? In all the mock drafts that I've been in, every single one so far, the best balls, way too early mocks, whatever it is, no matter the format, except for a Superflex league where people have gone quarterback crazy. Come on, kids. I'm seeing him. He's not making it out of the middle of the second round, right? I mean, he's not making it past. I want to say the sixth pick. I haven't seen him go past later than the sixth or seventh pick of the second round. When are you drafting Bijan Robinson? And Brian, we'll translate that into 10 teams for you, or we just kind of give you the number and you can figure it out.
Ideal landing spot would be 13 to 15 if I could get the value. I do believe that by August, Bob, he's going to be a first-round pick in the top 10. The train, the express will be rolling. I think when we do our magazine drafts, Bob, he might sneak into that first round in a few magazine drafts, depending who is drafting with us. If you know, I've been drafting with Emil and Bob for years on the Football Diehards magazines. Love it. So I do think the train is rolling. If I get him in best ball right now, if I get him at 16, I think that's an unbelievable value. I'd be very happy to get him in 13 to 15. I'd feel ecstatic.
And I totally agree with all that. And I think you're right on board. The momentum's only going to build. Let's jump to your number 2 running back out of UCLA, John. Who you like?
Zach Charbonnet. I'm a little bit more bullish on Charbonnet than the national media or what I see of other fantasy football prospect draft analysts. But what I see, I like big backs, Bob. And I think as we see more 5 and dime personnel on the field, Zach Charbonnet is a problem against dime defensive formations. You're looking at a young man who's 6'1", 220. Oh, Bob, he can get to the outside. He can run inside. He's not Bijan between the tackles. But Zach Charbonnet can hurt people in between the tackles. I also like the fact that he can get outside. He's a pass catcher. Be careful. The numbers are misleading. He has 75 career receptions. I will say this, though. He's not a great receiver. He's a good receiver. I don't know how good he is. I don't think he's very – I'll say this. 10 yards down the field, he's not a great pass. He's not in that Saquon, Najee Harris, Bijan Robinson category, 10, 15 yards down the field. But you get him in the flat, you put him on screens, Bob. Maybe you have him with an option route, quick option route out of the backfield. He's more than adequate on that. What I like about him is he turns up field immediately with the ball in his hands. And one thing I think people are missing with Zach Charbonnet, he came in and he played at Michigan. He was good as a freshman, Bob. And anyone who watches Michigan, their inside run game, the best is NFL fans. Why can't the offense coordinator who just got released in Baltimore? Why can't I remember his name?
Greg Roman.
Former Greg Roman. Yes, excellent. So Michigan runs a very Greg Roman-like inside power run game. That is a challenging run game for a back. And Zach Charbonnet wasn't the best skill set for Harbaugh. What does he do? He goes to the exact opposite, Bob. He goes to Chip Kelly at UCLA. They're spreading the team out. They have a mobile quarterback. They're getting Charbonnet on the edge and in space, and boom. But don't overestimate his freshman year. He had over 700 yards rushing in Harbaugh's. Why do I mention that? He is a little scheme diverse. I prefer him in a gap offense, but he can play in a zone. So he's had a lot of different offensive run games on his resume. I believe that he can pick up an NFL game, and with his size and speed, he could really make an immediate impact. I also think, Bob, his BMI, and I think he's going to go to the combine, and if he runs like a 4.48, which is within his realm of outcome, at 220, Bob, he's just going to skyrocket if he fulfills that. Now, if he runs a 4.54, he's still a very,
Right.
when you do size adjusted. But if he cracks that 4.5, that's going to be a power back that the NFL cannot resist.
John Laub has lit up the chat, everybody, with everyone. John wanted you to break into a total rap thing and go, I like big backs and I cannot lie. A couple comments here. John Bonneville likes Charbonnet too. Does everything well, not super explosive. Kind of reminds him of Nick Chubb. So, and there's some other running back questions we'll get to, but one in particular, I think Dame mentioned this. Jahmyr Gibbs seems to be falling. I've seen rankings that have Gibbs ahead of Bijan Robinson, which I think is. I don't know if that's an outlier, but I think CBS Sports has him at 17 and Bijan Robinson at 18 still in their prospect rankings. So let's dive into that. You have Jahmyr Gibbs at number 3. Do tell.
I don't know how someone could have him above Bijan, but that's fine. I mean, everyone has different analysis. You might think the passing game. I think Bijan's just as good of a pass catcher as Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, I might have Gibbs graded 1 point higher as a receiver than Bijan. But my concern, Bob, he's listed at 200 pounds. Is he 200? That is, to me, is very important. I did a little research, Bob. In the last 3 years at the running back position in fantasy football, only 3 running backs were under 200 pounds in PPR scoring. Jerick McKinnon, who had that outlier season with the Washington football team. He just had all those pass catches. And Nyheim Hines, who had a similar kind of, remember the year with the Colts? I think it was before Jonathan Taylor. He just had so many receptions that year that he got into the top 24 as a running back under 200 pounds. The outlier of the group is Austin Eckler, who's listed at 200 on San Diego. It looks like Austin Eckler's 200. So I'm a very big kind of proponent. I want my backs in fantasy football to be 200. I mean, it just, the numbers are overwhelming in the last 3 years. And I went back like a couple years ago to like 2016, 17, 18, and they were very similar, Bob. If you're not at the 200 level threshold, it is difficult to get the number of touches for fantasy football massive success. You can get an outlier, but what happens to McKinnon and Nyheim Hines the next year, Bob? They never replicate what they did. So I'm worried about Jahmyr Gibbs, and I have questions between the tackles. I think he's good, but he's not great. I think his vision is a little lower than I would want from my NFL back. I think he's a better player on the outside than the inside. And that's why I drop him to number 3, because I think Charbonnet can help you immediately in between the tackles. And I don't see a lot of power out of Gibbs near the goal line. And why do I mention that? It will limit his fantasy points. I mean, how many of us love the 12 to 15 rushing touchdowns, right? Now, could Gibbs get 6 rushing and 6 receiving? Possible, because he has 101 career receptions there. So it is possible, but I'd rather bank on the running back who can get the 12 rushing touchdowns at the goal line.
Right. So I mean, you're like, I'm thinking James Cook keeps leaping into my mind. Also, you think about like Tony Pollard at almost 210, and the Cowboys feel like he's most effective. Limited to 30 snaps, not touches, snaps. People, that's not snaps, and yet still Pollard was a top 10 running back last year. So so a lot to work through on those things. And I'm interested in Gibbs. As I mentioned to someone in the chat there, I think I mentioned to Brian Larkin. I think the earliest I've seen him go is like the 13th round. Just saw him go in round 13. So, I mean, what I am seeing, John, this year in all the best balls, and part of it is me. By the way, great conversation about Austin Eckler's body fat. He has one a lot of interesting views on that. Look, I'll suggest this: when you see these running backs not in uniform, you will be surprised to learn they are running backs when you're just walking along. Some of these guys are. I keep thinking back to some of the players that have been the most impressive physical specimens to me. Melvin Gordon looks like so insanely jacked. He might be one of the most impressive physiques I've seen. Rashad Jennings, also another guy who you see him, you go, that's a running back? Oh my gosh. So yeah, a lot of these guys are pretty well built up. Let's dive down the list. And again, I see some questions coming in that I'm going to throw in here later. So if you think I've overlooked your question, I have not. I'm talking to you, Brian and John. I see a couple questions in there I've still got to get to. But let's go to the next running back on your list. Do I even want to try this pronunciation? Israel Abanikanda. How did I do?
That's awesome. Bob, you nailed it. I mean, that was great. Now, I know I'm way more bullish on the young man from Pittsburgh than most people. But, Bob, my model loves him. I love the tape. He's only 20 years of age. There is so much ceiling on him. And I understand some of the concerns. But he's 215 and he's 5'11". I mean, Bob, he hit so many. He averaged 5.6 yards a carry. Love that. He had 33% of the market share for the Pittsburgh Panthers line of scrimmage. That is amazing. Like, just as an example, Bijan Robinson was 37%. Zach Charbonnet was 28%. So we're talking about a young man who has shown us that he can handle a large workload. And I've listened to scouts say this on, I try to listen to scouts and former NFL scouts on podcasts and stuff. They very much prefer backs who have shown us that they can be the alpha in their offense. To an NFL scout, that matters. So when I look at a scrimmage yards dominator of 33% and he's over 210 pounds, I mean, there's just things that I like about him a lot. Is he limited in the passing game? Yeah, he's not a great receiver by any stretch, but, he's not awful. You can get him the ball, and if you get it out on the edge, he will turn it upfield and he can hit a home run. He's sneaky good between the tackles, Bob. I also he was a track and field guy in high school. And when I look at these track and field running backs, they can help you on special teams usually earlier than other backs, which gets them on the roster. And Bob, we all know injuries happen. So if this young man is, the third running back, special teams returner, hey, there's a chance he gets on the field if an injury occurs ahead of him earlier than you would like. I like that very much. His speed is there. I mean, I'm not sure what he's going to run. Some people they think he's going to run like a 4.4. Hey, if he runs a 4.4, forget about it. I mean, that's just, I'd be so happy at 215 to run a 4.45. That's pretty amazing, but I've heard those rumors. And then I looked, I'm like, he's a track star. Maybe he does have that in his realm of outcomes of straight line speed. And we know the NFL loves speed. I get the concerns about him. And, I found one thing. I talk about high school only as a reference point. Bijan was a 5-star high schooler. Israel Abanikanda was not. But he was a 3-star, and guess what? Sometimes the scouting services are wrong. Sometimes the young men grow up, they get better, right? They get good coaching when they're in college. There's a lot of things. That's the thing, right? So I think some people, Bob, they're like, oh, well, he was only a 3-star recruit in high school. he can't be a top-level prospect. That was 3 years ago, Bob. I want to know what he did at college. Like, yeah, I'd probably watch like high school tape, and I'm talking minutes, not hours, in the summer of a player, top 10 running back. That's it. I'm not a 247 sports guy. But I see track, I see size, I see production. I mean, if in best ball, if he's sitting there, do you have a ADP? I mean, if he's past the 15th round, Bob, I'm all in. I mean, I'll take him all time.
I think and we're going to talk about some of this here in a minute about, which of these guys we feel are draftable, or, if they're like more landing spot, dependent on some of these things. A couple of thoughts here just before we get off. John Bonneville likes Devin Achane as his number 4. Says he has the Olympic speed, looks like a natural runner, thinks he needs to bulk up like Austin Eckler. So comment there on that. Another comment, a couple other comments before we can move on. Bonneville also sees a lot of love for McBride, and I do too. He is not in one of the players we'll be talking about today. We're talking Dwayne McBride from UAB. Just a quick thought on McBride, John, and why he might be. I've seen him ranked inside the top 5. It's not unusual, right? So, quick thought on him.
Absolutely, I love the tape. However, he's at University of Alabama, Birmingham, and how I talked about the 200-pound threshold, Bob, and I love the G5. But look at how many running backs in the last 3 years are in the top 24 in PPR scoring formats from the G5. Bob, it's less than 20%. So I have to factor in his level of competition. Also, what bothered, he only has 5 receptions in his entire collegiate career. Like, I'm not saying he's a bad receiver, but he's like I'm looking for a 50 catch threshold. He doesn't even have double digits. I mean, all the people I have above him, 62, 56, 38, 29, 75, he's single digit in receptions. I'm not saying he can't do it, but I don't have any film on him pass catching. So that's a concern.
All right.
I
don't want to go too crazy on it. I just wanted to get the thoughts out there, because we're going to move on now to your number 5 out of TCU, Kendre Miller.
I came on late. If you're looking for early breakout stars, Kendre Miller will probably fall down your board. But context matters, Bob. He was on the same team as Zach Evans. And Zach Evans was getting the carries the first 2 years Kendre Miller was on the team. Now, if you know, we'll break down Zach Evans in the future. He's outside my top 6. Zach Evans was a 5-star prospect. He comes to TCU. Kendre Miller was pretty much a second teamer. Good, but not great. What happens, Bob? He ends up on the field this year. He was one of the best college football players. TCU made it to Georgia in the championship game. Kendre Miller is one of the main reasons they got that far. I was surprised putting him in my model. He's 206 pounds. He doesn't look that big. Now, again, we have the combine coming up, so anything could change. But he's right now hits the 200-pound threshold. He had over 1,500 scrimmage yards this year. 6.7 yards per carry. He is explosive, Bob. In a dual backfield, let's say he ends up like someone on the Bills. I believe if you gave him 35 snaps and you gave him about 15 to 20 touches, he could be very efficient with the football in his hands. I like him a lot. He's good between the tackles. He's explosive on the outside. His receiving, because he was a second stringer, he only has 29 catches in his career, but he's a better pass catcher than the numbers show.
A couple comments. John Bonneville loves Miller. Next, Damian Pierce, he says, always makes the first guy miss. And also, Dane would like us to stop talking about Ava Nakanda, because I believe that's on her list. I believe it's on her list. This is the thing, we get into some of these players, and I mean, people have their little favorites, and you're hoping they remain under the radar. Not all of them will, John. Let's move on to your number 6, then we'll discuss a few outliers and a few other names, and maybe assign some fantasy values to some of these players we have discussed beyond what we did. And let's go to Sean Tucker out of Syracuse.
My model loves him as much as any player in the draft. My model likes him more than the film, Bob. I do think there are some questions between the tackles and with his vision. I don't think he's not as good as some. That's why he's number 6. But if we take out the film study, and it's good. Don't get me wrong, but it's not elite like some of the others. And Kendre Miller's film, in my book, is much better than Sean Tucker's. But looking at the model, when I saw he was 210, and again, that's what it says on the Syracuse website, so we're hoping he's over that 210. He had a 40% scrimmage yards dominator, Bob. He was the entire Syracuse offense for back-to-back seasons. I mean, he was the offense. So you're talking about a young man in the ACC. It's not the SEC, but the ACC is good football. It's a Power 5 conference. The defense knew that he was getting the ball, and Bob, they couldn't stop him. They could not stop Sean Tucker. He has incredible explosiveness in the open field. If he gets through the first wave of defenders and he gets in that open field, I say he has a spidey sense. He knows where the safety is, and he can get away from the safety and keep going upfield. I mean, he's very good in space at the second level of the defense. 64 career receptions, and here's where context matters, Bob. Syracuse isn't good at throwing the football. They're bad at throwing the football. They're not one of those programs, they're not LSU, Alabama. Their quarterback, I like him as a fantasy runner. He's a dual threat. He's more of a runner than a thrower. Sean Tucker is good at catching the football in space and turning upfield. He can also be run on patterns. You could put him in motion. You could flank him to the outside. Sean Tucker is a versatile player. I wish he was a little better between the tackles, but he's good enough. I think he's a dual threat guy or a dual backfield kind of committee guy, but I think he can be the lead guy. I think he's going to be a day 2 pick.
Interesting. So yes, and the context does matter, as Dwayne McFarland will always tell us. Also, I think this is an interesting way, to connect some of these guys up. Brian Larkin, the league I'm in, has 8 upstate New Yorkers. Tucker will be drafted early. That's part of it, right? Who you're drafting with. What do people draft a lot, John? They draft what they see. And if you're in an area where one of these players plays and you're drafting your home league, it's almost a safe bet that they're going to be probably overdrafted, right?
Yes. Well, so in upstate New York, Dwayne McBride might be a better value than Sean Tucker based on draft capital, right?
Right. Joe Herbert, Tucker is that bright, shiny back who will steal your heart and leave you wanting. We talked about this a little bit at the top with Bijan Robinson, and I've mentioned I haven't seen him exit the second round. I haven't seen him outside the second round in any of the best balls, whatever mocks, with one exception, and that is a 2 quarterback league where I think 20 quarterbacks went in the first 2 rounds. It was ridiculous. It was crazy. But some of these other players, like I've seen Jahmyr Gibbs almost exclusively come off as the second back, John. What kind of range are you giving the players that you like at 2 and 3? Charbonnet and Gibbs, what kind of draft range are you giving them in rookie drafts? Because I think, my experience, and maybe I'm part of that experience, I'm going to be drafting rookies a little more aggressively than I have in the past. I usually just leave it to other people, right? They're usually going to be more aggressive than I am. I think we've all seen the rise of the rookie wide receivers, and we know what rookie running backs can do. And I think Breece Hall's brief window of success last year, adds that confidence. Tyler Algier, a number of players, it's all about the opportunities to me. I'd like to wait till they get a helmet on to know what the offense is, to know what their opportunities will be. Something you mentioned, coaching. I mean, there are backs that came into this league. I want to say Kenyon Drake, for example, although maybe not the best example because he's never really emerged as a consistent high-end threat. But one of the things that limited him early on in Miami was he could not pass protect, and we see that with a lot of young backs and how fast they get coached up and they can learn that part of the job. Because I mean, look, I think every NFL coach has nightmares of Steve Young getting run over by Aeneas Williams and ending his career, right? You have that investment in quarterback, protecting him is vital. So some of these guys, that's going to always be an issue that limits them. But I don't think it's going to limit them when we're drafting. So when you see your number 2 and number 3, where will you be expecting them to go off in early drafts?
So right now, so are we talking just dynasty or redraft? I'm sorry, maybe. What do you want?
So I mean, I'm drafting a best ball, but I think it's a better reference is probably dynasty, though. I mean, we'll get into I think the redraft costs become more a factor when we get into the post draft, right? I think people are more interested, but also I think probably some of these people are interested. So kind of cruise through both if you can.
All right. So dynasty value, I expect Gibbs to be a top 5 selection. Obviously, some might like the top wide receivers, and next time I come on with you, we'll talk wide receivers. But I expect Gibbs with this PPR upside when people see the 101 career receptions, and he is, you said CBS Sports has him at the top, so he will be a top 5 selection. Charbonnet is the value in my book. He will not get past me in the first round. And I do have a couple, I'm crossing my fingers that he makes it to 11 or 10. I have 11 and 10 in 2 dynasty drafts in a 12-team league. I've seen him going off right now in early second round, Bob. That's a great value. If you could get Bijan and Zach Charbonnet coming back in the second round, the wide receivers are so deep. Let me throw darts in rounds 3, 4, and 5. Obviously, if you need tight ends and quarterbacks, that's a different story. But I'll throw darts at some of these wide receivers late in my dynasty drafts. I love Zach Charbonnet's value right now there. In best ball, if you get him after round 10 and they're your 4th running back, Bob, the upside is just too good. If they get on the field, remember Ramondre Stevenson? I think I was getting him in round 18 in best ball. Was it 2 years ago? Yeah, 2020 or 2021. Sorry, it was after COVID, 2021. He was an 18th, 19th round pick in best ball leagues, and he had like that late run for the Patriots late in the season where I was like, wait, I got this guy on my best ball team getting me 15 to 20 points late in the season. If you can get those types of players, now I would say, another great question they'll only draft 2 rookie running backs. Don't go crazy. Like I would not be drafting 4 rookie running backs. If you're doing roster construction, let's say you bypass Bijan Robinson, like he's the outlier. We know he's going early. I would then be very comfortable, but only draft 2 of these players later in your drafts because the odds of 3 or 4 all making on the field, you're looking at great odds there. But once you're past that 10th round, Gibbs and Charbonnet are no-brainers in my book.
Right. So, and I kind of agree with that, right? And I think you look at last year and some of the players, I mean, again, they're landing spot dependent. And, as you're drafting early, we're drafting blind to best balls, but everyone in the best balls is drafting without the information they need to do it right. So, you're all we're all rowing the same boat there in that regard. But I think once, they find landing spots, that's where you find guys like Tyler Algier, who I think I was advocating for last year in the Pro Forecast magazine as a potential high-end rookie because I like the landing spot. And by the way, keep putting the questions in. I'm going to get to those here in a moment. Brian Larkin just had a good one. There's been a couple others. But I feel like, you get that landing spot. And I thought the range of outcomes for, let's say, Tyler Algier last year was maybe he gets cut, maybe he's the lead back. Right by the end of the year, both of those things seemed like relatively possible, and I went with the lead back, and that's how it ended up. And so landing spot is going to matter. And that being the case, Brian Larkin wants to know what team you would like to see Bijan Robinson go to.
If I could paint a stent, it would be the Eagles. I do believe with that second, what do they have? Pick number 31. I think it's pick number 31 at the end of the first round. That would be, if that value of him, I would not take him at number 10. I'm going big. I'm old school. Give me the defensive or offensive lineman. The Eagles need to refresh the front 7 and the offensive line with youth. But if Bijan dropped to number 30, I don't see how the Philadelphia cannot draft him there. The value is too good. I do believe the rumors, and it's hard with Jerry Jones, right? You mentioned it before, Bob, when we started the show. But I got a feeling it might be very hard for Jerry Jones to pass up a Texas running back. What do they have, like number 22 or 24 in the first round? It
I
might
want to
be.
say that right in that 24 range sounds right. I'm covering that today on the Football World Diehards radio program, people.
Yeah, I think it might be hard for Dallas to pass up. Now, I think they should go on the offensive line, but we know Jerry likes the flash. I think he might end up there, but I would love Philadelphia in the best scenario.
By the way, everyone, if you just tuned in, we're talking to John Laub, the Gridiron Scholar. Follow him on Twitter at Gridiron Skull 91. He is this is the 10th season of him doing the rookie profiles of Football Diehards. Has established himself as one of the great assets on Twitter and in the fantasy community when it comes to the rookie players. And for the reasons I mentioned earlier, if you missed it, John doesn't just study, the post season or the draft season. John is playing Devy and college fantasy football, throughout the season. He knows this. He is steeped in this subject. So a couple questions about some outliers. By the way, John Bonneville has some great comments today. Feels like there's 12 running backs in this class that can play really well if they just get a majority of touches. That's a problem for every back, though. A majority of touches is an elusive thing. So we'll see how that plays out for some of these guys. Mr. Scampers made a great comment too, and I think it's related to the coaching. He said Josh Allen changed his fundamental throwing motion during an offseason to correct inaccuracy, and he's right. And I think this is another highlight of coaching, something we've learned that what a player is today. It's an evolution. Where he is not where he's going to be, or hopefully not going to be in a year or in 2 years. And coaching is a big part of that. And the better you get of coaching, the better off you are. Brian Larkin had a question. John, what small school running back could make a big splash in the NFL in this year's class if he lands in the right spot? I'll throw in that little caveat.
I believe most people know this name now, but I've been on him for a long time. It's Tajay Spears at Tulane. Yes. But I'm a little, it's funny now because I've been talking about Tajay Spears for 3 years. I drafted him like crazy in college fantasy football. He won me 2 championships last year. He was unbelievable. But my model, I like my model now. He is a G5 prospect. Now, he came in at over 200 pounds at the Senior Bowl, which I was ecstatic about, Bob, because he was listed at 195 on the Tulane website, and that was going to be a concern for me. There is no question about the physical ability on the field, but he's had 2 knee surgeries, Bob. We don't have access right now to the medicals. I don't even know if they're probably going to be doing them this week at the Combine, right? What we do know, we can read between the lines. If he's a day 2 pick, 3rd or 4th round, the medicals are good. That means someone on that organization cleared him from a medical standpoint with his knees. If he goes on day 3, Bob, that tells me someone looked at his knees and looked at the surgeries, and there's some concerns. Remember Jay Ajayi. And I'm trying to learn as I move forward. I loved him coming out, and I remember the knee problem, but I kind of want, you've said it and I picked it up from you, injury agnostic. However, I've evolved and I've learned more. Some of these degenerative injuries do have an impact on a professional career. And right. Ajayi fell in the draft. Because if you looked at the film and the model, he was probably a better prospect, but the injuries had to be a concern. What happened in the long run? He was a flash. He had 1 great season in Miami, and then obviously the knees went out on him. So I'm waiting. I have Tajay Spears at number 11. I do have a 3rd round grade on him right now. Bob, if he goes in the 2nd round, I will move him up dramatically. He could be the G5 outlier. He could be the one guy. I just want to say one thing to our viewers. I love the game against USC, folks. Context. I hear tons of people talk about this game. He had over 200 yards. Let me tell you something. USC was one of the worst defensive teams. They were like 128 out of 130 on run defense, Bob. They were so bad on run defense. That is not the game you should be mentioning for his upside. USC stunk on run defense.
So a couple points to follow up on there is to the injury agnosticity. I totally agree with you. There's, understanding the difference between someone who's chronically injured and a chronic injury is important. Someone
Yes.
that just has had a string of bad luck, and football's contact sport, collision sport, more likely. Everyone's going to get hurt at some point. And I'll go back to last year's, top 12 in ADP. If you look at them now, I think all of them have now missed significant time, except for, I think we added Jamar Chase. So I think it is Justin Jefferson has not, and that's about the extent of it, right? Everyone else pretty much in last year's top 12 has missed a fair amount of time due to injury. So it's going to happen, people. You're going to have to work through it. But there is a big difference. Chronic injuries, you want to watch for it. If someone has that history of the same injury that keeps being an issue. Dalvin Cook with the shoulder that he just had surgically repaired. That shoulder has been an issue since 2019. That will be a chronic injury. It's not going away. It's a continuing thing. And maybe the surgery this year will correct it. And he's learned how to play through it. So that's all. It's a kind of a nuanced thing. I get heated when we start talking injuries, and I hear the lazy analysis to me is, oh, he's always hurt. Oh, okay. That's an easy out. And look, if you don't want to draft players like that, more power to you. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be allowed to do that. I'm just saying it's a lazy way to look at it. Everyone's always hurt if you want to throw that out there. Anyway, so we'll just, we'll leave the wide receivers for next time. But if people haven't been to the website, go check it out. John's top, what is it? Is it the first six like running backs, John? Yeah, first six. We do have the wide receivers up. I will give a slight preview and let people know that Jordan Addison is the number one, and number two and number three kind of like fall in the line, although not everyone likes them in the same order. So that's the fun of this. And tight ends, John, it's a big class of tight ends this year. Michael Mayer seems to be the guy that everyone's interested in. John Bonneville wants me to knock on wood. I'm not trying to jinx Justin Jefferson. I don't want him to be this time. That's the problem, though. Everyone's going to get hurt. You'll find more of John's work on footballdiehards.com. We have a couple more minutes here if you want to throw in some questions, but I just want to take care of a little business here. Football Diehards tonight. We are going into what Sirius is calling the off-season mode. They're focusing on baseball. We'll be on Saturdays every week from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern, except for next Saturday, when we will not be on. And by the way, when you go to the Football Diehards website, if you are a new subscriber, you haven't subscribed yet, use the promo code DIEHARDS to get a 15% discount on everything there, your year-long subscription. Tons of information, great stuff, including all the stuff you just heard from John Laub. And the slides we were putting up are basically, the kind of information you're getting from those articles on all these players. Some really great info. Football Diehards on Sirius tonight, 7 to 9. We'll be on every Saturday, 7 to 9, except next week. We're being preempted by a baseball draft. A lot of baseball going on at Sirius right now. Fine. We'll be here with the live stream. I'm going to be gone this week, though, so no Wednesday live stream. I'm taking days off, John Bonneville. By the way, Dalton Kincaid, Joe Herbert has his tight end one. I think that's interesting. We'll get into that at some point, Joe. But yes, I am allowed some days off. I'm leaving tonight after tonight's radio program. I hope to be back for a live stream next weekend. Flying, it seems, is a bit of an adventure, so we're going to kind of leave it open-ended. Maybe Saturday, maybe Sunday, I'll be here to do a live stream and probably just focus on questions, but we'll be off Wednesday. And then we'll get John on after that for some more in-depth looks at some of the wide receivers and get into that tight end class you are also eager to hear about. One last snarky comment from John Bonneville. Is Tyjae Spears a better route runner than Quentin Johnson? John, I think that's a trick question.
Oh, that is a fair, because Quentin Johnson's not a good route runner, but that is, wow, it's hard to compare a running back, but yeah, that's an interesting one. I never thought of it that way because I'm not impressed by Quentin Johnson's route running.
All right, fair enough. We'll find out more about that. Thank you, Mr. Scampers. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Really appreciate all you watching along and following along each week. Again, off on Wednesday. You can catch the radio show tonight. No radio show next Saturday. Live stream next weekend. Yes, what day to be determined. I'm Bob Harris. I thank you all so much. Really appreciate you all coming. Hit the subscribe button here on the YouTube page. Watch for our shorts. They'll be out there. We'll be chopping all these up so you can get some digestible views on these things. Go to the Football Diehards website. Use the promo code Diehards to get a 50% discount. Follow John on Twitter at Gridiron Scholar 91. Gridiron Skull 91. I'm at Football Diehard. I'm Bob Harris. This has been the live stream.